Hey there, and welcome back to From His Thought. It's my pleasure to introduce you to Kyle Maxwell, a bootstrap philosopher, entrepreneur, and contemporary thinker. Kyle, welcome to From His Thought.
Thank you, Michael, for having me. I'm excited.
Awesome, awesome. So Kyle and I have had a few exchanges, like most people these days, across social media, and so this is our kind of our first time sitting down together. Kyle, I mentioned that you kind of have this kind of interesting background in terms of what you're doing now, but I was hoping you could kind of fill us in and tell us the story before, we get into what you're doing these days. What's your story leading up to what you're doing now?
Well, that's gonna take me like 3 hours. So
Okay,
I'm going to try to truncate that down as much as possible.
sure.
So I originally came from the almost getting into the music industry. I had a record label, Heart of Music Entertainment. So you can kind of Google that on internet if you want. It's even the logo is
Okay.
tattooed on me, so that you can tell how serious I was about that.
Hmm.
I was managing music artists. I had one, two, three, four, five. Had like five people working with me at the time. I had like six artists. We were really doing it, and we kind of just fell apart because especially in 2020, because I used to be woke.
Mm.
I really came from never. I was never a leftist. I was never a committed leftist, but I was woke. I was in that intermediary between being fiscally conservative and being ignorant to being like just a full on like blue haired leftist. I was in the middle. That's
Okay.
what wokeism actually is. It's the waiting room. It's like
Mm.
it's the batch. You're getting groomed by leftist ideology. That's what being woke. That's what being woke is. So I was in that group, but I wasn't really about that life. So 2020, those BLM riots, how that stuff started, and I posted a black square. This was the culmination of this whole entire thing
Hmm.
of the next journey of my life after the music stuff collapsed, after all that hip hop stuff was over. I'm not going to get into that because that's going to take, I'm going to need like 10 hours to explain all that because it's going to not make sense.
Okay.
So I'll jump to this spot after 2020, after everything fell apart. And I posted, and so during the BLM riots and COVID and all that stuff, I posted a black square. Like
Hmm.
I was one of those people who were, promoting BLM stuff just in 2019, 2020.
Hmm.
So for context, like I was living that woke life. I was in it. I was posting stuff. I was still making content at that point. Even my content was starting to get woke.
Mm.
Even my content was getting woke. I still had videos on Twitter of me talking about redlining and
Mm.
systemic racism. So you guys can go check that out. And it wasn't until I, started discovering the what do they call it? The DDW, the dark intellect, the IDW, the people
Hmm.
on the intellectual dark web, like Ben and Jordan, and and just seeing how Antifa and BLM were starting to just really starting to act demonic, something that alerted something in my soul. I'm like, this isn't right. And
Mm.
you guys are going up to innocent people just trying to enjoy a sandwich, and you're like, oh, say Black Lives Matter, say this, or
Mm.
you're racist, or you're this, or you're that. Like, what the
Mm.
hell is this? Like, what is that? I thought this was like a I was so naive. I was so blown away by the fancy speeches and the movements and the Instagram posts and stuff. I was so blown away. But then when I would look on what was going on behind the scenes on the street, this is like a literally a leftist revolution.
Mm.
So I seen that and I was like, it's kind of weird. What is all this stuff anyway? Where all this come from? So I started, digging knowledge. I started reading.
Mm.
I never read a book in my whole entire life up until 2020. I never a reader up until like 3 years ago, and now I
Okay.
have a whole freaking bunch of stuff. Now that's funny how that works out.
Right.
So I'm not. So that's why I'm saying I'm not an expert because I'm 3 years into this. So I don't want anyone thinking that like what I'm saying is like the freaking gospel because I could be wrong about everything.
Hmm.
Socrates said he didn't know anything. So this one of the
Hmm.
smartest guys who ever existed said he was clueless. Like who the hell are anyone to promote themselves as some type of expert? But anyway,
There you go.
So I'm starting to untangle everything, and a year goes by. My stuff is falling off my desk here.
No problem.
A year goes by, and I'm starting to change my content. I'm tweeting stuff. I'm like challenging the narrative. I don't know if you noticed or not, but I'm a particular darker hue than you, and I was challenging the status quo. So you can imagine how that ended up. And one day I was like, I posted a black square last year, and I was really wrong about a lot of stuff. And if I can change my life around, my mind around, so can you. That tweet, I think now it has like 2 million people seen that tweet.
Oh wow!
It completely viral, went everywhere, and that just blew up on Twitter. It just literally blew up. And ever since then, I've had videos, more tweets. But I literally, it's a random tweet. I posted a black square last year. I was indoctrinated by this stuff. It's a random tweet, and it just went completely crazy. And now here we are, 13K on Twitter, which is just freaking crazy. And well, here we are now. Yeah. So now I'm starting to really develop my. And when all that was happening, I promise I'll shut up in a second. When all that was happening, I was presented with the temptation to become a right-wing conservative, like rigid thinker, grifter type of person.
Sure.
And that is, that, and you're a freaking. I was like 21 at the time, 22 at the time. I'm getting all this attention. That lifestyle presented itself very glamorous. I was like, oh shoot, I really could be the next Ben. I mean, I've had potential business partners present me with, he was like, oh, you could be the next Ben, you could be the next Matt Walsh, you could be the next this, the next that. Have your talk show, talk about politics, day-to-day events. And I would be so, Michael, I would be rich if I did that right now. I'd be in a whole different, better place, like financially, socially better right now if I was doing that. Because and there's nothing wrong with that. If you want to do that, then by all means, you go do that life. But I had a conversation with a friend, and she completely, her name is Nicole Murphy. She has an Instagram live show. You should I'll try to remember to send it to you after this. We had a conversation. She was on my podcast, and I was trying to tell her, like, yeah, you got to beat people's head over. You got to beat the truth over people's head, and we got to get those liberals, and we got to make them. We got to force our beliefs on them. I crossed my hands like this, and she was like, "Well, you're saying that you just shit." And she presented. She was like, "You're doing the same exact thing they're doing, right? You're shoving your beliefs down their throat." And like that, I was like, "Oh crap!" Like, I'm a hypocrite. Like when she said that, I was like, "Holy crap!" So then I had another self-reflection. I'm like, "Yeah, I'm becoming one of those people that the left thinks that conservatives are like." I was becoming a parody of the right.
Sure.
Not being open-minded, being closed-minded, and conserving everything.
Yeah.
What's the telos of conservation? The same thing, the same telos as endless progressivism. We're just gonna go out and progress until we fall off a cliff. It happens in the exact same reverse, where we're just going to hold on to everything. We're going to get stagnant. We're going to conserve everything. Nothing changes.
Right.
Authoritative right. Same exact thing.
Yeah.
So you have to be aware of those two planes. So I was thankful I had that interaction as well. So it's so crazy. So I got saved from being a wacky blue-haired leftist, and then a year later I got saved from becoming somebody who like a Bible thumping like authoritarian. So it was getting to that point. Like every tweet was about politics. Like every single tweet. You go look at it. So I got saved from both things. So now I'm like in this weird middle spot with all these people who like read or are smart and we're talking about like foundational theories and people and like people without history, and then this middle spot. And I think this is the most comfortable I've been in. And when I got to this spot, I was like, yeah, I belong right here in the middle. I think this is where the medium exists, because both sides are trying to use a pun here for the show. Both, when you get the extreme sides are trying to derive the art from the is.
Right.
The left side is saying, okay, well, here's our dogma, and this is what the world presents itself as. So therefore, we must do X. And you go on the opposite side, they're saying, oh, well, our book says this book that was written thousands of years ago says this, so therefore we should all respect it and abide by it. If you look at it simply like that, both sides are trying to extract that out from the is. And I think the answer is to, number one, reject that temptation to just hop from the sense data to what you ought to do. But I think the answer is what we already know. The answer is, well, what do you think? Well, I think this. Well, what do you think? Well, I think this. That is the answer. The interaction, the dialogue between both hemispheres. That is where that is what the answer is. The answer is not a proposition. The answer is something you participate in. That is what the dialogo said. That is what the answer is. When I discovered that, I was like, holy crap, that's what we should be doing. So it's not about being right. It's about what should be at the highest place. Who the hell, what the hell do I know about that? If it was that so self-evident, what should be highest? There are grown adults who are running the government right now. You know, if it was just so damn easy to know what was most valuable and what we ought to do, okay, well, why are kids killing themselves? Why are we ripping the penises off of kids? Why are we sending billions of dollars to some country in freaking like Euro-Asia? Like, what are we doing? Why if everything was so self-evident, why is everything on the verge of potentially falling apart? If what ought to be is so self-evident from what is. So obviously there's some sort of thing that we're not getting right on both sides. So how do you decipher what we should do? It's through that dialogue, it's through the speech. Now, it just so happens that one side thinks that there is no such thing as that common dialogue. And the other side thinks that the other side has to not fall temptation to the idea that what is true is what we decide on, because that's what democracy is. That's a very good critique, a Muslim critique. Actually, it's a Islam critique of democracy. Of, okay, well, we all just say this is right. Does that indicate that should be right? So you're playing with fire no matter what. You had to set a democracy, and this is all we agree on. Well, this is all what we agree on. Well, okay, 60 years ago, we all agreed that I was 3/5 of a human being. So it's like you're on a slippery slope there with democracy.
Right.
Now, if you jump to authoritarianism or a totalitarian state, well, obviously we all know the slippery slope there. So I think the answer is always in the middle. Sorry, I was rambling there, but
no, you're fine.
I think the answer is in the middle. It's through podcasts like this, where we can talk and have discussion. So I think what I'm doing with my content, I hope that's what I'm doing, is I'm really trying to start the conversation, because that's the only way. It's the only way.
Okay. So let's see. Tell me if this is a fair, rough summary. You kind of started out in music/entertainment. You had a left-leaning persuasion that I'm sure was intrinsically motivated by, for all the right reasons, right? This wasn't some Herbert Marcuse thing that you had imbibed and you were being very cynical. You had very good intentions, no doubt, but you saw things manifest in the real world that said something like, if the ideology that I'm espousing is good, moral, and just, then this would not be manifesting in the world by my fellow travelers. So you stumbled into the IDW. For those who don't know, it's a classically liberal to mildly conservative, but social justice skeptical group of thinkers from very diverse cultural and philosophical backgrounds. That kind of shapes how you think in terms of reasoning through problems, as well as the mechanism of reason, as played out between dyadic conversations and conversations at a societal level. And what I took away at the end there was something like neither side has exclusively has all the right answers, and that the mechanism by which we find the right answers is what needs to be preserved, even though in the modern age it seems as though there's a intellectual strain on, let's say, the left that says that that mechanism is just tyrannical and oppressive, and there's a tendency on the right to say, okay, fine, well, if it's just all will to power, then we're going to play to win. And you're
Yeah,
saying we need to reject both of those
yeah,
forces. Is that a
that was
fair?
pretty sad. Yep.
Okay. Okay. So we'll circle back to a few of the politics things, but the main thing I found interesting about you is that, one, as you mentioned, you're very young to be doing this. I think there's, almost, it's probably about an 8-year age difference between the two of us, and
Yeah.
you're
Turning 25 next month.
dude, awesome. Well, happy early birthday.
Half of
And
50, half of 50.
yeah, half of 50. That's right. But I mean, you're pounding out this content, and so for people who are listening now, if you take issue with some of the political stuff, hang around, and we're going to see if we can get to the philosophical aspects of why Kyle arrived where he did, and we'll do what Kyle just advocated. We're going to try and stress test these ideas. I want to touch on something that you had put out recently. You have a lecture series that's available on YouTube, and we'll be sure to link to this in the episode artifact at the end of the show. It'll be in the show notes. Called "Well-Rounded Fool." It's on YouTube, and so I was hoping you could speak a little bit about that. And in particular, could you talk about your critique of what you call, I think, scientific empiricism, what some people might be called scientific materialism? Could you speak on that?
So I've had this idea of the well-rounded fool for about, I want to say, 6 or 7 years. And the way it started out and the way it is now, or like it changed throughout the years. But I always had this idea before I knew anything, before I was even educated or half educated, whatever. I had this idea when I was in high school. I was like, there's something that's common amongst there's a certain spirit, there's a certain character that I see many people inhabit across my life. I was always that weird kid that was like always analyzing like other people and their actions, and always trying to think about. I'm always curious about what someone's motivations are. This is how I was. I don't think it's anything paranoid, but I think it's just the way I was. I'm always interested. I want to know why you thought that. Why
Mm-hmm.
did you do that thing? I'm very high in openness and creativity. I took a personality test last summer.
Mm-hmm.
I'm 98th percentile in no, I'm first percentile in orderliness. So
Mm.
I'm less orderly than 1%. So the most disorganized person, I'm more disorganized than them.
Right. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but the openness and the creativity kind of overcompensated for that. But anyway, so I was always focused on. I was always interested in why someone did that certain thing,
Mm-hmm.
and essentially that's a pattern recognition. So I'm trying to draw patterns here. So I'm like, okay, so that person did act that way in that particular instance, and then I see another person do that.
Mm-hmm.
Those two people don't have anything in common, and they don't have any, like, they're not in cahoots with each other. I hope not. So
Mm-hmm.
why do they both do that? This certain attitude came out, and particularly at work or in school or even in the family.
Mm-hmm.
Before somebody does something that they know they shouldn't have done, or I've seen someone acting in a way that was very deceptive.
Okay.
I was seeing someone or viewing someone try to make themselves believe something, or just seeing someone just being deceptive. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know why that was always a prime interest of mine. I have no idea why. I can't answer that question.
Mm-hmm.
But I was always just, I think I was, I think it's almost like an instinct of mine to know. Are we allowed to cuss on here?
Go for it. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I'm like, I know I have a bullshit meter of like,
Mm.
I just know when someone is, and my best friend's like this too.
Mm-hmm.
We have jokes all the time. We just know when someone is just full of crap.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's like from, just, I mean, experience. I've been like I said, I was in the music industry. I mean, they aren't particularly known for their for their integrity. Let's just say
Sure.
that.
Fair
So
enough.
I just know when someone is just like you soulless, like scumbag. I just know when someone is doing that, and I
Mhm.
know, and I've always been hyper aware of it when I was doing it. That's
Mhm.
where it derives from,
Mhm.
because I knew in certain situations I was like, did I really like just did I say that certain way? So I knew that that person had that reaction, so they could say this like that.
Mhm.
Like, why did I do that? What is that?
Right.
And as this idea, so that idea was in the back of my head, it started to develop, and I got to this point where I was like, there is a gaping difference between knowledge and wisdom.
Mm.
So let's say, and we all know that person who just happens to just know a whole bunch of stuff. I know the year. I know about the year this war happened.
Mm.
I know how many sisters uh, this president had. I know this particular math. I'm a wizard in this in chess. I just know stuff. You know that person who just knows a bunch of stuff.
Mhm.
But then if you judge them on their ethics, they are a jerk.
Mhm.
They're a horrible human. They're just not the best person ever. They're
Mhm.
rude. They're mean. They're condescending. They possess those dark triad traits. They're
Right.
not. They're trying to instrumentally move themselves throughout the world. There's a gaping difference between, and I believe that there's probably strong data on this, but I believe there's zero correlation between knowledge and wisdom.
Mm.
There has to be some type of intermediary that connects the both,
Mhm.
because that's what the art is. It is what art facts.
Mhm.
I'm a human being. That's a tree. Science exists. You're a man. That's a microphone. Laptop. 2 + 2 = 4. These are facts. And then there's wisdom. You ought not to push a baby off of a cliff, because the baby is something that it is a life. It is a vulnerable human being, and it cannot defend itself. So you ought not to act that way. I ought not to slam the door if someone's walking behind me. I ought not to slam the door in that person's face because I'm going to harm them. I ought to open the door for a woman walking by me. Like this, these are things that we just ought to do.
Mhm.
So there's a space there.
Mhm.
And what the well-rounded fool is a person who mistakes his knowledge for the wisdom. I'm mistaking my ability to acquire facts, to acquire information, to acquire these things, to acquire my perception. I'm mistaking my talent, my ability to do those things
Mhm.
for my wisdom.
Mhm.
Is an overcompensation. You have these knowledge, you have these facts, but you have not acquired the character, you've not acquired the virtues
Mhm.
to properly disseminate which facts should be at the top, which facts should be at the bottom.
Mhm.
There's no hierarchy in your knowledge. So by definition, you are a polygamous nightmare of random facts and knowledge.
Mhm.
So the well-rounded fool it's a book. It's going to be a book, but it is a series of investigating throughout history, throughout philosophy, throughout psychology, many different disciplines. When somebody or
Mhm.
some phenomena expressed that archetype of a well-rounded fool.
Mm.
Some of the examples I use, I make biblical, I make theological arguments. I'm making, like I said, it's multidisciplinary. One of the arguments I use on another video I posted on, I don't know if you're on Instagram, did pretty good. I think it has like 14,000 views, I
Mm.
think, on Reels. I was looking, I was interested in the story of Adam and Eve and the satanic spirit of all. Like Satan can, like he literally is that which has knowledge outside of a moral framework.
Mhm.
That's how I've categorized the spirit of evil as
Mhm.
the acquisition of knowledge outside of a moral framework. So if you look at that story, and why was the and maybe this is not like the canonical like reason why this story was. I mean, whatever. That's what I mean. So this is just my interpretation of it.
Sure.
Why was the tree of knowledge? Why was that concealed? Why was the
Mm.
tree of knowledge something that Adam and Eve ought not to step near or receive something from?
Mhm.
And Carl Jung and Eric Norman. Eric Norman was a student of Carl Jung. He wrote this really great book called the History and Origins of Consciousness. And
Mhm.
it's a really, really great book. And in the beginning, Eric Norman was talking about the moral underpinnings behind actions. in Jung, and he's there's always critics of Jung. They're saying like he's like a crazy, like cuckoo, like mystic guy, and maybe he was, but you can't. We should be able to, like you said, separate the wheat from the chaff. What's some interesting things he said,
Right.
and by far he has more interesting things to say. So I don't care if he went on in his later works and started talking about like his synchronicity. Some of that stuff is legit. Like some of it is, some of it isn't. But one of the interesting things that Eric Norman said was he was talking about the concept of eating.
Mm-hmm.
Like we eat in groups. Like prehistorically, we used to eat. And eating itself is he said it is a religious action of eating.
Mm-hmm.
You're putting your because to eat something is to value it. You value yourself. You're trying to insert something that you see into yourself so that it can become a part of you. You're trying to preserve yourself because you believe that you are an entity worth existing. Like that is literally why we eat. Now there's also a deeply uncontrolled biological reason why we eat, because we obviously can't function if we can't eat. But what happens when you haven't eaten in a while? What's the only thing you think about? The only thing you think about is eating. What happens if you're very, very thirsty?
Mm-hmm.
That becomes the reason why you exist. So it's always a push and a tug. What we extremely lack becomes our God.
Mm-hmm.
And what we chase after, what we center everything out, what we focus our attention on for that particular moment, just like those deeper biological motivations like hunger or thirst or those sexual desires. If we seek out something, that momentarily becomes our God.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what Eric Norman is saying. What guides our attention for that specific moment, that in a specific way becomes your highest value in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
So keep that in mind. So what did that fruit represent? When that snake said, "You shall eat from this fruit, and ye shall be gods," that came up again. Why was ye shall be gods? Why is God and eating something? Why? What is that with that connection there?
Mm-hmm.
There's something you are directing, you're orienting your perception towards this object so you can eat it, so you can gain what? Ye shall be gods. And this is a tree of knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Why wasn't it a tree of facts? Why wasn't it a tree of truth? Why wasn't it a tree of power? Why wasn't it a tree of prosperity? Why wasn't the tree of sexual desires? It was a tree of knowledge. Knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
So the word knowledge comes from that Greek word gnosis. Gnosis is literally to know. That I believe the Garden of Eden was the first eradication of Gnosticism. That was literally the first thing that happened. That mental masturbation of relativity and and that the whole entire Gnostic mythology, that was the first thing that was casted out right from the beginning. Because that Gnostic way of that Gnosticism with the capital G, that is the acquisition of knowledge outside of a moral framework. Because God said, "Don't eat that fruit from that tree."
Mm-hmm.
And the serpent told them, "Well, if you did know that, you could acquire this superpower." So what is happening to our culture right now? When we acquire information, so when we want to know something, what are the motivations behind that? What do you want to know? If I'm asking you, okay, well, you want to get on my podcast? Why? So we can talk, or so I can make you look like the inferior one, and so I can get a whole bunch of followers, so I can promote myself. It works. It abstracts in the particular instances, but it all derives from that root of my perception is being guided towards something. What is the motivation? The motivation was to be a god. The motivation was to be better than what has created me. And that was casted out right from the beginning. The well-rounded fool is the person who acquires information, who acquires actions, who acquires people, who talks to people, who asks questions.
Mm-hmm.
That's another big one. Someone who asks questions outside of a moral framework. You know how devious that is? to ask somebody a specific question in a twisted, contorted way so you can make them answer it in a way that only pursues what you wanted. You know how twisted that is? That archetype itself, the person who does, who embodies that, that is what the well-rounded fool is. And maybe I sound like a schizophrenic right now, but it makes sense in my head. That is what I'm hyper focused on, and I'm trying to explore how many other instances how has that occurred when someone was acquiring that information outside of a moral framework to pursue their own wants, to pursue their own goods. And that's happened. I mean, it's literally happening right now. The acquisition of knowledge. Okay, so we can. I mean, that's what leads to scientism. This is what leads to hyper scientific, and this is what leads to the next question. Okay, so we can. So here's what's going to happen if we implement this specific policy, this specific rule, and it's going to hypothetically help X, Y, and Z. So therefore, we're going to do it. Or this new assisted suicide thing that's coming up in culture today. Well, all these people want to die, so we're going to implement a system that's going to help these people do what they want to do, which is to not exist anymore. It's like, okay, well, that on a surface level, if you look at it objectively, there are people who want something. There are people who are in charge who can facilitate these people wanting something, and then they're going to die. Is that not the acquisition of knowledge outside of a moral framework? So you can see that these things, and at the most fundamental level, and it literally exists in every single situation. These are obviously there's more drastic situations like assisted suicide, but even in the minute situations, you walking behind somebody and they drop their wallet. What are you going to do? Knowledge outside of moral framework. So the knowledge is what I've seen. I empirically witnessed someone drop their object. And I was on the ground and they continued walking. And there's no one else around. You know something. What is it that you know? I know that someone dropped their wallet. So what are you going to do? Are you going to tell them? Or are you going to say, hey man, you just dropped your wallet? Or are you going to take it for your own gain? It happens in the literally the micro situations. The well-rounded fool is someone who acquires information, their perception, guides their perception towards something outside of a moral framework. The well-rounded fool separates their knowledge from their morality. So they have a dualistic model, an ethos that they live by. That's how they're able to value what they want to value, believe what they want to believe, yet espouse something completely different.
Sure.
They're separated. They have two different gods. They are worshiping two different gods. They are worshiping two different gods. That's another commandment. It all ties back. It all ties back to the beginning, and that is what this whole entire lecture series is centered on, and to understand how we can reject that temptation to acquire the knowledge outside of a moral framework. I'm sorry if that sounded like.
No. Well, first I would say that I'm asking you to condense the lecture series into a 10-minute response, 8-minute response. So that's a lot. That's a tall ask. So for people who are interested in more, go listen to the lecture series. But I want to dig a little deeper on a couple of different aspects there. So there's this notion from Hume that has inspired the name of this podcast, From Is to Ought, that we've touched on several times here. And you've talked about it from the perspective of acquiring knowledge, as in, if I understand correctly, acquiring a series of material facts about the world, right?
Yep.
Okay.
And also even in the abstract. So thinking about something that could exist.
Say more.
I actually believe so. I think I posted this video yesterday. I think that evil exists. I don't think that evil is a material phenomena. I think it's something that exists in the metaphysical world. It's something that exists in the culmination of it. Because if you have to think about it, it's like Okay, well, Hitler didn't just wake up one day and just create Auschwitz and just toss those people in there. Like, had to come from somewhere. Where did it come from?
Hmm.
You want to draw it back to the Enabling Act when he disabled the Constitution of Germany? You want to tie it back to there, or do you want to? I mean, is it that? Is it that what when on the piece of paper when they stalled the Constitution for the rights of those people, so that you want to? I mean, is that the fun? Is that the foundation,
Right.
or was it when he was in prison and he was writing Mein Kampf when he was expressing when he was expressing his hatred
Mm-hmm.
towards towards the Jewish people, when he was expressing his hatred, he said verbatim, if he was in charge, he was a general in the First World War. He said if he was in charge of it, if he was in charge of it all,
Mm-hmm.
it would have been better. Germany would have prevailed. He said that. You know how narcissistic that is to say that. If
Mm-hmm.
I was in
Right.
charge, all this would be better.
Yeah. Yeah. All right.
That is like the archetype of a politician, by the way. That's
Well,
what a politician has to think that.
it selects for that, certainly.
A presidential candidate. If I'm in charge, everything's gonna be better.
Mm-hmm.
That is the ethos you're acting out. So I think the evil exists and the well-rounded fool exists in the abstract. And
Mm.
it exists in the he wrote it down. It was a dream, it was a fantasy he had.
Mm-hmm.
His Lebensraum. That's the German word for the living space. He viewed Germany as his living space. Germany was sacred, but he was romantic about Germany. It started in the gospel. It started from he was an apostle for hatred and evil.
Mm.
And he was a prophet, and he prophesied what he was going to do, and he did it. And he got his men to do it. He got his men to fulfill it.
Right.
He wasn't out there digging the ditches.
Right.
He got his followers to go out there and to engage in his Gnostic fantasy. I think that is where the evil exists in the culmination.
Okay.
So that was a little comment on the abstract. So I think evil exists also in the abstract.
So I agree. I think that evil can exist as an abstract idea, and that abstract idea can be materialized in the world in a way that's evil too.
Yeah.
But if you're just reading, let's say, a chemistry book, right, to try and put the counterfactual to you, if you're reading a chemistry book outside of a moral framework, you just say, I'm going to learn more about chemistry. Do you have a value judgment on that act of reading the chemistry book?
Yes.
What is it?
Because you could be also reading a cookbook.
Okay. Agreed. So you're saying that you value the chemistry, the opportunity cost of your time is such that you're valuing the chemistry book as the highest return on investment of that use of time.
Yeah, of that particular moment.
Mm-hmm. Now, do you have a moral value judgment? You, Kyle, have a moral value judgment on me, Michael, reading a chemistry book, even if I can't articulate why I'm doing it. I'm just like, that seems like the best use of my time.
Do I have a moral judgment on why you're doing that?
Yeah, do you have a moral assessment on it? Because one of the critiques you had of this idea of going from is to ought is that you should avoid being the well-rounded fool, if I understand this correctly, because you don't want to just pursue a series of facts about the world or ideas in the abstract detached from a moral framework.
Yes.
And I can see where that makes perfect. For example, Marxism is a great example of where that goes terribly wrong.
That is yes.
But for something more trivial, like someone reading a chemistry book, right? I mean, it's tough to make the case that they're doing anything with moral valence. Maybe I'm wrong, but they are certainly pursuing knowledge of a type or information of a type. No?
Well, I think. Well, here's the thing.
Okay.
So let's trace it back. To answer your question, I promise I'm not dancing.
Sure, go ahead.
So I'm a admirer of Carl Jung.
Okay.
And one of the things that I think he was right about was his comments on how the scientific thing even came about and what scientists are doing, like what they're actually doing. So we like to think of certain acts like scientists, or like me reading a chemistry book, or me doing a math equation.
Sure.
Like we have to think of those things as some separate. Like those are our golden calves, if you want to, like, for instance. And one of the things that he said was that what essentially at the root, what the scientist is doing is he is transforming the matter, the physical reality. He's taking those materials and he is studying them. So before he studies those materials, he first has to value those materials. Before he values those materials, he first has to value himself, because he believes that he is a person who is capable of making a correct value judgment on what he sees, despite if it's chemistry, despite if it's molecules, despite if it's a whatever.
Sure.
You have to believe that in yourself, that you are someone who is capable of following the scientific method. If you want to follow the scientific method, you believe. And so, say some phenomena occurs, and you're the person who has to record what's going on. The scientific method presupposes that the witness is a truthful person. Because why can't you just write down something that didn't happen?
Sure.
You're writing down what you've seen. Now, you want to write down what you've seen because perhaps maybe you value the scientific method.
Right.
And you are following that medical, I know it's kind of different, but you're following that medical ethos. Thou shalt do not harm. We go back to what is harm. Harm is something bad. What is something bad? Something being bad is the opposite of something being good. That's a value judgment. The root of the science and the medical of that whole entire domain is something is rooted in an ethical domain. So you're someone who values. So for you to even have that, for that chemistry book, for you reading that thing is the wrong question. I want to know why that chemistry book exists. I want to know why chemistry even existed. It started from people. It wasn't Carl Jung said it was an alchemical transformation. It was people who understood that they could take these materials, transform them into something worse. Why would I transform it into something worse? Why would I study this book if it's not if we're good? If studying chemistry made me made life worse? Why would I do it? No, because if you study chemistry, you can learn how these molecules act. You can learn how these molecules interact. If we learn how these molecules interact, we possibly in one day could stop this one pathogen from occurring. Who knows? I'm not a chemistry expert. So I'm just talking out of my neck here.
Yeah, freestyle with it. That's
what is it? Why are we doing this?
And
if you ask, I've watched debates a lot. If you ask the scientists, okay, well, why? If you ask the scientists why, period, they won't be a happy camper, because they're not interested in why. They're interested in what. They want to see. They want to know. They're interested in what occurred. So my moral judgment on the person just reading a chemistry book. I mean, you can read a chemistry book if you want, but what really matters is why that person, why that person needs to know why they are reading that chemistry book.
That's a good point.
Are you reading that? I mean, and we like to think, sometimes we just do things that are not morally motivated. But I would argue, and something that John Vervaeke has centered his entire work around. I don't know if you are familiar with John Vervaeke.
I am not.
He's a professor, assistant professor of psychology at the University of Toronto. He's a really, really smart human being. He was on my podcast in September. Okay. And he was also on Jordan Peterson's podcast, and he's actually lecturing on Jordan's Peterson Academy, one of his online things. So that's pretty cool.
Awesome.
John Vervaeke is a really, really smart guy. I highly recommend you look at his stuff. So he's centered his whole work around this idea of relevance realization. That sounds really, what's that? It sounds very fancy. What is that? So his fundamental question is similar to mine. A lot of the stuff I do is inspired by him. What is guiding Michael's attention? What is guiding that? Right. So there's an infinite amount of things that we could be paying attention. You could be talking, you could be watching the sports, you could be watching, the game. You could be watching something else that you shouldn't be watching. Who knows? But there's something, we're doing one thing right now.
Right.
Why are we doing this one thing? So the thesis is, there's a billion things that we could be doing, but we center in on one thing. And now this is not just a whole bunch of like intellectual like gobbledygook or anything. It's actually centered in like actual cognitive science. Because
Yeah.
if you look at the amount of the amount of the amount of neural firings that can go off in our brain is about, I think is about like 10,000 to the, I think it's like 10,000 to like the 10,000th power. That's some crazy number.
It's plenty.
Of the potential, yeah, the potential fires that can occur in our brain. That number is smaller than the potential actions that someone can partake in. So we have less, so on a neurological level, we have less ability to acquire information than things that we can actually do, even on that level. So you have to ask yourself, why is it that I'm doing this one thing and not the other? Well, one answer is because you just physically can't do it. Well, on the other side is, wait, maybe I'm my actions are guided towards what I value the most. Why am I? We like to think that, what is this? This is a cigarette. I'm just smoking a cigarette. I was like, yes. In the most empirical analysis possible, yes, you are smoking that cigarette. But why are you smoking that cigarette? Oh, because because I wanted one. Why do you want that cigarette? It was because I started smoking when I was 10. Blah blah blah. Why did you start smoking when you were 10? Oh, because I hung around this guy. Well, why'd you hang around that guy? It's because he made me feel like I mattered. Why did that guy make you feel like you mattered? Oh, because I didn't have parents. I was an orphan. Why were you an orphan? Because it starts all the way back to that point of childhood trauma, believe it or not. And we like to think that we can just do things and there's no other deeper motivations behind it. We like to abstract and say this is just a thing in and of itself. But what the real answer, it traces all the way back. Carl Jung said, if you show me a sane man, and I will cure him. So you like to think that I'm just doing this thing. That means something's wrong. If you're doing something and you're just so confident in it that there's just nothing wrong, show me a sane man, and I will. So that obviously that's like a he's being tongue in cheek about it. Right. But I think what he was saying was, if you're just too comfortable and you're not worried about how this could be potentially harming me, that means there's actually something wrong. Right. Because you should always be, even reading a chemistry book. I'm reading this chemistry book because I want to be a good chemist. I'm not just reading this chemistry book so I can take a picture of it, so I can post it on my Instagram story and make it look like I'm a smart person. So then I can get that other girl who's in my chemistry class to ask me out on a date. No, I'm reading this chemistry book because I actually value what's in this book. Yeah. Everything, down to even reading a book, is a value judgment. Now, hyper focusing on this has the potential to make you kind of weird. But I think I think it's important, because that moral judgment, staring down on just the mere objective reality, is what religion has always done forever. Look at you guys. You guys are out here. What do street preachers do? I've been watching a lot of street preacher pride parades, and not street preacher pride parades. I've been watching a lot of videos of preachers preaching at pride parades. Okay. And the people who are in these parades, if you kind of deconstruct it, the people who are, take away, whatever LGBT, take away all that stuff. Sure. There's a group of people who truly believe that they're just doing something for its own sake, and they're not harming anyone. And then there is a one single figure that is taking their symbol. Could be a flag, could be a pronoun, could be a book. He's taking their symbol, he's rising it to the highest point of abstraction, and that symbol is reflecting on them. And they're saying, oh no, we're just out here in this parade, we're not doing anything wrong. He's making a value judgment, because these people who are they are being worldly. They're losing themselves in the world. That's what the Christians have always been saying. Don't stop being worldly. Don't be of this world. There is a higher judgment. There is no higher judgment when you're in collective groups like that. When you're in a collective group, you are no longer Michael in that group. You are a agent of this group.
Mhm.
There is no leader. I mean, literally, it's in their socialist doctrine. There is no that their doctrines are set up for there to be no leaders.
Sure.
So when there's a leader out there, he raises a value judgment. How's that going to make everyone feel? He's casting judgment on them,
Mhm.
on their sins, because they are caught up in the action.
Mhm.
They have removed. They have this dualistic. They have this dualistic ethos. They are holding one thing to be true and
Mhm.
then proving another. They are separated.
Mhm.
They're separated.
Yeah.
And what the person does, the truth teller in the middle, he's making that known. That even I don't care if it's a parade, I don't care if it's a book, I don't care if you're even just drinking a soda.
Mhm.
Every single action is a value judgment. There is no thing that exists outside of a moral judgment. And I truly believe that.
So I think that's a fairly, I don't mean this as a pejorative, I mean this is a descriptive. I think that's a pretty extreme belief. For example, if you
Yeah.
sampled the population, I don't think many would believe that. But I think many of the people that you read and whose ideas you're articulating in the modern age do subscribe to that, or they tend to more than they would not, the Jungian aspect. So I want to drill down a little bit more on some of that. I think it's all good thus far. Um, One thing I wanted to touch on was I have this thing where you said scientists aren't interested in why, they're interested in what. I think that there's a couple of things here. One, there is a material difference between the natural sciences and the social sciences in terms of
Yeah.
the orientation that they take, obviously. So let's confine our, because I think for the natural sciences, for example, you could still make moral judgments about, for example, exploring nuclear energy. I think
Yeah.
that's totally fine. But you're most likely what you're going to be doing there is you're going to be making some sort of consequentialist argument. But the social science case, I think, is very clear that there are people in many different ideological camps, some camps that disagree with each other immensely, that would say, we're interested in why in terms of the theory, right? We have some theory, and we say X causes Y, letter Y, not the word Y. So X causes Y. Why does that happen? And that is our theory. So they would say we're interested in Y for that reason. But you're saying something more philosophically oriented, which is like, no. What is orienting you to that particular problem? Why are you focused on that? And that's a different analysis that would need to be done.
Yeah.
So if that's the case, I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit here.
Great. I love it.
Okay, so the social justice left, and again, I mean that descriptively, I don't mean that pejoratively. The social justice left would say something like, there are certain strands of science that have a very dark history, and they have a point there.
Yeah.
And you material scientists in the liberal Western world, you want to say that we can explore any ideas as long as those ideas don't cause direct harm in the world. We're saying that your exploration of those ideas cause harm. Therefore, you shouldn't study those questions. It sounds to me like you would agree with them. You may not agree on what those questions are, but you would agree that that's an appropriate analysis to take. Do I understand? Okay.
Yeah. So you're saying that you're saying like a more radical person on the left scientific realm would say they would heavily object to like something like conversion therapy because that's something that is immoral.
And someone on the right would object, who's even in the practice of science would object to so-called gender affirming care, right?
Yeah.
So, and my understanding is that you're saying something roughly like, we need to be considered in what we're exploring. We don't want to just explore because we can explore.
Yeah.
The Ian Malcolm line, you were so busy thinking whether or not you could do something, you didn't stop to think whether or not you should.
That's great.
Is that your belief system, or are you more of the classically liberal persuasion, which is like science is an open, fair game as long as we're not causing any direct harm in the direct application of science?
So I like the question, but I think the question is part of the deeper problem.
Okay.
Because I don't think that I don't think the proper level of analysis is, well, what should we do about this whole science thing?
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't believe that science exists. The hell was that?
Oh,
You
no.
still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh yeah, I think my freaking phone's dying. Hold on.
No worries.
Sorry.
Take your time.
All right, we're good now.
All right.
Yeah,
Very
I
good.
actually don't think that. So I don't think that science exists like in its own thing. I see people doing stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I know that's a very broad way of looking at it. That's actually do you know Zabor Zizek?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, he said there's a one video. He said, I mean, it's really profound. It's kind of funny, he's a character, but he
Yeah.
said, things happen. I was
Right.
like, well, yeah, things do happen.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, so yeah, so yes, things happen. And I was like, wait, he's actually kind of right.
Mm-hmm.
Things happen. People do stuff.
Mm-hmm.
People say things. People make noises.
Mm-hmm.
And you can, add the labels and make it seem like this is some like special thing in and of itself.
Mm-hmm.
But and one of the people who really influenced me to start thinking this way was, I hate to say his name against Carl Jung. He said science is another theory.
Mm-hmm.
But what did we do before we had that rigorous scientific method? What did we do before that?
Mm-hmm.
What was your level of proof before we had that stringent scientific method of something being true?
Mm-hmm.
What was the standard of something being real? What was the standard of something existing?
Mm-hmm.
Well, before it was, I mean, obviously went by the senses, but before it was something that was inculcated in a value system.
Mm-hmm.
Something I talked about in the first episode. This is Aristotle's entelechy. So this was something I'm very interested in. So the entelechy is a combination of the two words. It's the telos, that's the telechy part, and the intel. So it's the intellect plus it's the intellect. It's the intellect plus the end.
Mm-hmm.
So it's intellect plus it's what is this divine purpose?
Mm.
And he used one of the examples he used was the seed, the seed of the oak tree.
Mm.
We can just say, so we're scientists. We're saying that's a oak tree seed. But what he was saying was no, that's the wrong level of analysis. We can say that's an oak tree seed, but if we put that in the ground and we water it and we take care of it and we come back a couple of years later, that thing's gonna be that's gonna be a gigantic object.
Mm-hmm.
It is so he viewed thing as, so he didn't think that was a tree, that's an oak. He looked at the oak tree in its telos as the same thing.
Mm.
To Aristotle, that was the same thing. This telos was what was most important,
Okay.
not the actual object. And that's how I view, and that's how Carl Jung viewed, and that's how I think how a better way to view things. We can apply the same thing to science. So I'm not looking at science as a thing. I'm looking at it as a narrative, something that postmodernists actually have, right? They're a narrative. They're the narrative structure that we adapt ourselves to. Things are narratives. So I'm looking at science as the same exact thing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, where they went wrong is that obviously the whole power stuff and all the whole and making something like a self-preservation of what you want. That obviously that prescription is wrong. But things in themselves are sort of like narratives.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm looking at every scientist differently, every science differently, every single thing that happens. The science is not just like just one thing that just happens. With what there's different forms, all different types of flavors of it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not looking at like science as a entire whole. So even when I say like science, I'm trying to be more specific. Like I said, like rigid scientific thinkers who like objectively, who will object against any metaphysical argument. They don't want to hear anything about Apostle Paul. They don't want to hear about that mess. They're only focused on the science. So when I'm talking about science, I'm not talking about I'm not trying to group them all into one thing and say you're all doing X.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really trying to critique a specific genre of science that exists. that genre of, if we can prove this thing to be true, then this is the gospel, like that Fauci sort of science. That's what I'm really trying to get at. But your question of, well, how aren't they kind of doing the same exact thing? That's my point. We're all making value judgments. Only some are admitting that. That's the fundamental distinction. You have to be able to admit that you're making a value judgment. So when a scientist says, "No, we have the scientific method. We have scientific evidence," it's like, okay, so you have your evidence. I have my metaphysical evidence. Well, we can scientifically prove it. What is embedded in that statement? You're saying that your scientific evidence is more credible than mine because it's science. You're saying, well, because do you know Gad Sad? Yeah, like he'll say, like he has a funny joke. He'll say, "Good bruh, it's a good bruh science." And that's your argument. Like, yeah, you said that because, well, I'm right because bruh, it's science. You're literally saying, okay, well, science is a better, it's a more credible methodology than what you're saying. So the second you make that argument, the second a scientist, the second he has his data and he presents it to the world, he's saying that this ought to be valued. As soon as I say that I have scientific evidence that proves X, even if I'm right, even if you could be wrong, even if I'm right, the second you say that my evidence is more credible than yours, something that you can't empirically prove, you are making a value judgment. The second you say that, you're stepping outside of science. Jay Dyer has a popular saying, so the scientific method cannot prove the scientific method. The second you say that this evidence is better, you're placing an objective methodology above another one. The second you start placing things above others, you're making a value judgment now.
Right. You're saying something like that can't come from nowhere, is what you're saying.
Yeah, it can't come from nowhere. And that's literally the title of this show. You're driving the ought from the edge. You're saying, well, this is evidence because it is science. So therefore, we should value this more. You're making that leap. And I think that we should be extremely careful about that leap because it's a dangerous leap. And that leap leads to, from what I've seen, nothing positive ever comes from that leap. Because what that person's really saying is, I want this to be true. It's an introverted, romantic way of thinking about the world. And I'm not saying that there is no such thing as truth. I think, obviously, I hope I am a Christian. I don't know. I'll figure out when I die. But I believe that there is an objective truth that everyone lives by that exists outside of our language, that exists outside of our actions. I think of truth as something that's omnipresent. It's always there. It's always been there. It's something that we have to adapt ourselves to. It's not something that you can learn in like a academic paper. It's something that truth is the truth in the logos, that agape. Agape, that's the Greek word of love. There's been many different words of versions of love. But agape, that's the word that Rebecca uses a lot. Agape is me wanting the best for you outside of my egocentrism. So I can love someone, like I can buy them flowers, I can like spending time with them. But when I miss them, I become sad. But when I'm with them, I become happy. That's a very low resolution version of love. That agapic love would be that one mother who was her apartment was on fire and she was tossing her infants off of the seventh floor and she died in there. That is a far deeper version of that. If she loved her infants so enough to throw them off of a 7-story building. If we're talking about love, if I loved someone else, you wouldn't throw your wife off of a 7-story building if you didn't have to.
Right.
But that agapic love would be, well, if we're in a fire and I have the potential to save her, despite what may happen if I toss her off the 7th building, it's better that she live on. And I'm going to sacrifice myself. That is that agapic love. And I think that spirit should be held at the highest with truth. And I think scientific exploration should be guided by that.
Mm.
Scientific exploration should be guided by that agapic love for the sense of being. So if you're going to posit a hypothesis, is that hypothesis serving you? Is it serving your party? Be conscious. It's just to be conscious of that. If you were not if you were not with your Pacific group, if you didn't believe the things you believed,
Mm-hmm.
if you didn't like the things that you liked, would you still posit that same hypothesis?
Mm.
Now, the probability of that is probably 0, but that doesn't matter. The whole idea is to just be conscious of that. Because if you're the opposite and you never ask yourself that question, where do you think you're going to end up?
Mm.
What are you saying to yourself? Well, everything. Well, I wouldn't. Well, you're saying to yourself, I don't deceive myself. Every question I ask is genuine. I never deceive myself. I'm not susceptible to self-deception.
Mm.
That's for the lesser folk. That's what that person's saying to themselves. That's what Hitler said to himself too. He said, if he was in charge, everything would be better.
Right.
That is the experience of someone who matters.
Or perhaps we hear it in the echoes of the young aspirational revolutionaries when they say something like, real Marxism or real communism has never been tried. It's the same thing. So I'm with you there. Okay. So it sounds to me like your dimension that you would say that if you were a granting body for scientific research, for example, right?
Yeah.
Take some material investment to do science, you would have a dimension for agapic love, whereas the left would say something like, we have a dimension for diversity, inclusion, equity, right?
That is their God. Yeah.
So, okay. So, but I just want to be clear because like I'm trying to give them a fair shake. And I think you in a way are as well. You said, they have a point, which is something like you are both critiquing what is a more Western liberal tradition of science abstracted away from the extended material consequences and unexamined motivations that go into the science. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, again, I think that's an extreme view in that it's not very common, but it is interesting. And I suspect that there are going to be some people who listen to this who are not, who haven't been inculcated in the practice of science, that will very much appeal to. And I suspect there will be people who are inculcated in the practice of science who will think, much like you just wrapped up with, which is like, no, I'm above that, or like, I don't have to worry about that. And perhaps that's true, but I would argue that there is that scientists do have an ethos, a responsibility to examine motivations. That's not to say that you should be cynical about it or make assumptions, but to examine motivations and seek to be at least not destructive or deconstructive, but to try and build things up, but at least not to tear things down unnecessarily.
And to be fair, to the person who may object to, that way of looking at the world, I don't even think that critiquing me would be even reasonable, because this is this process is an age-old critique, and this is actually found in Stoicism a lot. So when I was reading Meditations, Marcus Aurelius said, he was known for his abstinence. He said sex is nothing but the body's. He said something like nothing. Sex is the friction of flesh and the transmutation of fluids, of bodily fluids. So when he said that, he's not saying that that's all what sex is.
Sure.
He had an enlightened sense of, he was able to separate the event from the purpose. He was able to separate the event, what's actually happened, from the purpose. That's something that I believe Clifford Geertz talked about this. There's an agent arena relationship. So it's the same thing with the oak tree and the seed. So at the most fundamental level, yes, these are two human beings who are combining their bodies and who are sharing liquid.
Mhm.
Like you need to be aware. That is what a scientist would be interested in. The scientists, their job is to examine those things. So what is going on? But also, that could be this same process could be a a mutual enjoining of two people who love each other.
Mhm.
Preferably a man and a woman. That's kind of the only way. Two people joining together who have an affinity for each other,
Mm.
trying to make a baby, trying to
Mm.
start a family. That whole stuff is not romantic. This what's going on down here. We're not imposing anything on that. I think when Marcus Aurelius was describing what that was, what sex was, he was using that as he wasn't saying that oh, this is all sex was, and he wasn't saying that this is what sex is this magical loving event. I believe he was saying that don't you be confusing the event with the purpose,
Mm.
because these things are two different things. He just wants you to be aware of that.
Mm.
When they were in where they were in they were fighting some country. It was maybe I think it was what now would be considered probably I think it was Germany somewhere, some country. They were fighting. They were in some battle, him and his brother, and they won. And so when his brother came returning back to wherever they were at, just Rome or whatever, they had this huge party. The Romans got down, Michael. The Romans got down. Orgies everywhere. Marcus Aurelius was in his room reading a book while there is a 20, 30 plus orgy occurring
Mhm.
in his gigantic house.
Yeah.
So this showed you that. I mean, this showed you the level of even in the same ecosystem as like a gigantic orgy occurring.
Mhm.
I'm going to be in my room. I'm going to read this book. He was able to separate just because there's something like that going on outside of my door doesn't mean I have to participate in it.
Right.
I'm doing my thing because that's what I'm valuing. He's not letting the outside stimuli
Mhm.
affect what he is doing inside of his head. And even if he did decide to put that book down and go have some fun, it was because he made that conscious decision to do so.
Mm.
He was extremely interested in perception, guided perception. If he was going to put that book down and go have some fun, it was because he made that decision.
Mhm.
So if you're going to sacrifice, that's a sacrifice. I want to do this. I'm going to put it aside because I want to go do something else. So if you're going to make that decision, even in a case like that, that's a value judgment. It's a sacrifice.
Yeah, sure.
So it's just to be conscious of it. Yes, it could have been a mindless decision. It could be because that book was boring, but just to be aware of it. So
Mhm.
next time when something else is going on, if you're in a house, if you're at your house, someone calls you out and say, "Hey man, we're having some fun with the guys. You want to have a drink?" It's just to be consciously aware of that. Did I go out because I feel entitled to please my friends? Did
Mhm.
I go out because I'm not interested in this book? Like why? It
Right.
goes back to that question of why. Why
Mhm.
did I do that? People like Marcus Aurelius, he had his flaws, but I think that something that we can learn from the Stoics is that they were obsessed with why. And I don't agree with everything with Stoicism. For instance, we can I don't think putting like the agony and putting like the strength of everything is on us. It's
Mhm.
like everything's on me, like enduring that pain. It's like, yeah, I'm gonna take everything. We just physically, because we know now, like more and more modern figures just know now that you just can't do those type of things unless you have been inculcated. I mean, people just didn't just become stoic out of nowhere. Like just
Sure.
proved out that they were growing up in that school. They were wearing those robes. They were sleeping on the floor. They were being groomed
Mhm.
into stoic Greek life. They didn't just. It wasn't like some 35-year-old guy who just picked up this meditations and now he wants to be a stoic. Now it didn't happen like that. It was something that you were groomed in this lifestyle. You were educated as a kid. It's something that clearly that you were put in.
Mhm.
So there's something. So I don't agree with Stoicism all in a whole, but something that we can learn from it is they were extremely questioned about why. There was another stoic thinker who said something, I forgot who it was, but he said, "Don't listen to the words coming out of my mouth. Listen to what connects them together."
Mm.
So you can see this occurring pattern of the objects themselves versus the story. Don't listen to the exact words coming out of my mouth. Listen to what connects them.
Right.
So you can either word chop and correct me in my grammar and correct, oh, if I didn't pronounce this word right or wrong, you can be that dick and do that. Or you could listen to what is this guy really trying to say?
Mm-hmm.
What's the telos of it? What's its point? You can see that pattern of separating and being conscious aware of the events versus their actuality.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where I get these ideas from. I'm not I'm not the one who started. I'm not the one who started being consciously aware of the particular events versus their telos. I'm getting this. This is stuff that has been. I'm standing on the shoulders of giants when I present these ideas. So I hope I'm doing something. Hope I'm drawing people back, and I'll always try to credit the people who I'm always trying to credit the idea that Breaker or Xenos or Aurelius or freaking Seneca or whatever. I'm always trying to credit where the ideas are coming from. I'm not taking credit for any of the stuff.
And no, you do a great job of citing your sources, man. It's commendable.
I don't want to be that guy who's like, "Oh, these are all my ideas." Like,
well, it's not even necessarily that. It goes back to kind of your ethos, which is you want to examine why you think what you think, and you can't do that if you don't know where the ideas you have come from. And so it's a natural second order effect of that examination would be that you have this impulse to say, well, this is the intellectual and moral or intellectual and ethical history from which I draw. That's totally fine. I do think your point about the Stoics being intentional is very good.
And sorry, I'm not trying to cut you off or make like a political argument, but when Aurelius made that comment about sex, I mean, what does that sound like? Someone saying, "Oh, sex is just the transmutation of bodily fluids." What argument does that sound like?
I mean, there's a bunch of arguments you can make. You could say
there's something that's been popularized. I mean, it just started. I mean, and it just started. But something that's been more current is the whole pro-choice, pro-life debate. When the whole debate about what is a fetus,
right?
What is that? Now, Aristotle, the more classical version of that, wouldn't even be that wouldn't be the question.
Right.
That is the problem here. We wouldn't be asking what that is, because that embryo in you, he's seen no there just to separate those things is the error.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That is the error. This is the clump of cells.
Well, there's many errors in that debate, but that is certainly one of them. I would encourage people, because we don't have to adjudicate the entire history of pro-choice versus pro-life, though it's an interesting argument, and I'd be happy to delve into it. I would encourage people to check out. You're familiar with Michael Knowles?
Yeah.
Okay, so he has a debate with someone who's a medical school third year. You know what I'm talking about.
I watched it.
If you can, bite down on your mouthpiece and get through that 2-hour conversation, it is a testament to. I called it. Michael Knowles had the courtesy to allow his debate partner to self-immolate. Yeah, it is quite impressive. Michael Knowles is very smart. He is.
Yeah, he's very. I think he's the smartest on the Daily Wire group. I think he's smarter than Ben.
He's. I think they have a particular just difference in their training. I think that manifests very strongly, but it's interesting nonetheless. And one of my goals is to convince Michael Knowles he's wrong about statistics, but that's because I have a data science and analytics background, separate issue.
Oh, what did he say about? Oh, he said, I think he had a video. He said science was fake or something.
Yeah, I haven't seen that, but he said science is fake. And I know what the point he's trying to make, he's just making it hyperbolically because it's good for the online clicks and all that kind of stuff. But he says something that, state and statistics share the same root word. And essentially he's making the point that the state or malevolent forces will always find some rationale from which they can draw some smidgen of empirical evidence to support, and therefore we don't have to take statistics seriously. But as far as I'm concerned, that's the same postmodern argument. It's like, oh, well, there's always something that we could use to deconstruct or re-examine. things in a way that makes it look, and you pointed out one of the flaws there, which is that, well, we can't actually conceive of this countably infinite number of possibilities. That's one. The other one is that those countable infinite possibilities, just because they're possibilities, doesn't mean that they all have the same fruit that they bring to bear in the world. And so,
that is the answer.
Right. And so, so I would encourage people to watch that debate. I think it's a great. You'll get to see a lot of the ideas that Kyle and I are kind of talking to and dancing around as it plays out between people who have this training, or a person who has this training, and someone who doesn't even, in my opinion, doesn't even do a good job defending her position on the scientific merits alone. That will, except for one area, she's a little bit better, but that's an area where she happens to agree with.
I think she said the word unequivocally. I think like 30 times.
Yeah.
I think she kept saying that word. I was like, she really likes that word, unequivocally. She said it like 30 times. That was really funny.
Yeah, it's not really a way to support your argument is not to say that, well, my profession is circumscribed that I'm correct, or you haven't taken a class on this, so you don't know. Now that might be the case. It'd be good if the classes we had were providing particular training, but that's not necessarily the case.
Saying my knowledge and your wisdom don't overlap. This is a separate thing in and of itself, and there's no overlap.
Right. Yep. So I do want to. All right. So we've knocked out pretty much everything I have on here. I have 2 questions for you if you have time, Kyle. Is that
right?
All right.
I didn't realize how dark it was getting home.
Yeah, no worries. All right. So first question, and these are both going to be to push back. I want to see kind of like the extent of where you're thinking on this, and to the extent I agree or disagree is not the point. But I'm happy to opine if so desired. So I appreciate what you're saying about having asking the wrong question when I posed the last one to you about social sciences and the postmodern critique, as well as your critique, which is something like, no, there has to be a moral standard against which we're agreeing to undergo this scientific process that we decide on a priori. And your extra point on top of that is it should be examined. We should be conscious of it. Okay, fair enough. But what I didn't hear was something that says, because you said, you kind of think of science as just another thing, the Zizek thing, things happen. You think of science as it's just another way of investigating. So here's my question to you. Are there types of questions for which you would say that the scientific method of inquiry is the appropriate method to bring to bear, given whatever your moral priors are?
Yes, of course. I think that, if you're a person who is in like the second stage of, or the third stage of cancer, and you're trying to eradicate that, I wouldn't send you to a priest. I would be, you should be going to the hospital, consulting a professional. You should be getting that scientific treatment. Now, hopefully, whatever treatment is available, or let me make this even worse. Perhaps you're struggling with your identity as a person.
Okay.
Maybe you're having feelings. I'm not saying you, but maybe you're having, you're struggling with who you are as a person. Now, I'm not clinically trained in anything, so perhaps you should seek professional help. Now, here's where things get tricky. Now, that professional help has to be inculcated in that agape spirit, because a few centuries ago, if you were to approach a doctor or a psychologist and you would say, doc, I think I'm a woman. Now, a couple of years ago, scientifically, they would have told you, Michael, what in the hell are you smoking? There's something wrong here, and we're going to find out what's wrong. Now, before you even got the word woman out of your mouth, you would have had a bevy of drugs to take, and they already would have scheduled your transition surgery. So this is what we should really be focusing on. What domain is so sometimes science is a proper answer. So if you are actually experiencing those symptoms of gender dysphoria, then you should go to someone who knows more about that. So don't go to me. Don't go to your parents. Go to someone who knows about that kind of stuff. So there are some instances where that can actually be the case. Now the thing is, it's not just a one a be all end all. So I'm telling you that because you're a grown adult. Now if you're a 7, that it changes.
Yeah.
You shouldn't value the person in the white coat over your parents. The first person you should go to is your parents if you're experiencing that as a child, because number one, you can't consent, you don't have a prefrontal cortex, you're dumb, you don't know anything. So you need to go to your doctors, your first doctors, which is your mom and dad. You need to go to them, because you shouldn't be valuing the chemistry book over what your parents are saying at the age of 7 or even the age of 13. I mean, you're still an adolescent child. You should be there's different tiers there, because your dad and mom are valuing what they are valuing knowledge. They're valuing what's above them. Maybe their parents, maybe science, maybe philosophy or whatever. There's tiers there, and hopefully the people who are guided by science, hopefully there's something above them.
Mm-hmm.
If there is something above them, they're following some type of transcendent value. Could be religion, could be God. They could be a Satanist. They could be atheist. Who knows? There's something above what they're doing. So if I'm a scientist and I have someone come to me with rapid onset gender dysphoria and they don't know what to do, if I happen to want, if I'm a advocate of that kind of stuff, it's in my self-interest to tell you that, oh yeah, this is my chance to parrot all the relevant buzzwords so I can look cool to my coworkers, so I can have this patient, so I can do this, so I can engage in this thing. So there is certain instances where science is a proper answer. When you're developing, when you have a psychological disease, or when you've been diagnosed with something hard like cancer, or something hard like whatever, some type of disease or whatever. With a certain if you're in a car accident and you just lost a leg, like we're not gonna send you to the guidance counselor. You should go get actual medical attention. So yes, there are certain instances where science should come to the rescue. But there is something, obviously, when we're gonna be redundant here. There's something that should be guided by that help. Are they trying to help you because they want you to be a statistic, or they actually care? In 2020, hospitals were doing something that CDC was following a protocol called postpartum. It was called postmortem studies, or some sort of policy called postmortem. And what they were doing was the bodies that died, and I'm sure you've heard about this, dead bodies that who suffered a car accident, or someone who killed themselves, or someone who got shot, someone who was murdered. If when it was called postpartum, I forgot what it was called, something like that.
Postmortem, probably.
If they found the pathogen, if they found the COVID virus in those bodies, that was being recorded as a COVID death.
Right. Yeah.
So there's always it's the snake in the Garden of Eden. There's always something there. There's always that deception, that possibility for deception. I'm not going to go on that because we talked about that enough. But that's the answer to your question. So yes, science has its purpose. So I think the left has its purpose. I'm not going out. I don't worry about what needy family. I mean, it sounds bad, but I'm not all worried about needy families, or worrying about what gay people are going through day to day. I'm not really worried about trash on the street, like as much as someone like on the left is. I'm not really worrying about a cop not being as nice as they should be. I mean, thank God we have some people who are posting those videos of some guy who's literally innocent of just getting shot. I mean, thank God we have somebody who's mad about that.
Sure.
Because I'm telling you right now, I'm not worried. I'm not spending my time checking to see if every police officer is doing their due diligence. I'm not checking that. But thank God there's someone is doing that. They have everyone has their role to play.
Yeah. Yeah.
but it's about the I hate this word, about the nuance. I mean, it's about they're playing their role. They got to
Yeah,
play their role.
sure. Well, I think that I agree with you that nuance is a totally overused word, but I think where you use it there is actually appropriate because there's the nuance of each person has, as you mentioned earlier, a subset of things that orientate them in the world and things that they're focused on. You can't say I care about all solving all of the world's problems equally and maximally because that
I
means
mean, you care
nothing.
about nothing.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But there is also nuance between these things in terms of how do we, as a society, say prioritize these things, and does the priority of these things change over time? And then not only how do we prioritize them, but then how do we go about solving them, and what trade-offs are we considering there? So those are all super complicated. And I appreciate you saying that, there's a role for people that disagree with you, who have a different
Yeah.
perspective and different set of priorities.
Why do you think Truth Social and what was that other one?
Mastodon.
What was it?
Mastodon, the left-leaning one.
Yeah, no, it was start with a P. It was
Oh, Parler.
probably, yeah. Why do you think those apps just? I mean, we say that these we got to do something about these people. We it's like a love hate relationship. Like you don't want to be in like some gigantic echo chamber where everyone just thinks the same exact thing. Everyone says the same
No,
thing. Like,
no,
we don't want that.
no, no, no. I agree. I think there are some people who should have the ability to turn off the vitriol on social media if that's what they prefer.
Yeah.
But no, most of the times people want to run into actual interesting ideas, and interesting ideas are ones that are not
I mean,
obvious.
that is a virtual nationalism.
Mm.
They made their own world
Right.
of everyone who values the same thing and does the same stuff. That's what alt-right nationalism is. That's what Parler was.
So I'm not familiar enough with Parler to know whether, I mean, we have one as FreedomCast because we have every freaking
Yeah.
social media, but
It was a conservative social media platform.
yeah. Well, is there a difference in your mind between conservative and alt-right nationalism?
I think yes. So the alt-right nationalists would say that wokeism and leftism has no space, and they need to. I mean, there are people who were arguing for the sedition of states. Florida should go off in his own thing. It's like this is insane.
Yeah.
So that's not conservatism. I don't think that is, because I don't think the founding fathers would ever say anything like that about the country pulling apart and deviating and doing all. I don't think that doesn't that's just out of the question. But I think conservatives, where they differ, is they're saying that our values matter, and we should hold on to the Constitution, and we should be weary of change. Not all change is good.
Right.
And the alt-right would say we need to destroy these libs and get rid of them because they're harming our society. And that's why, I mean, I was just having this conversation with the person before you. I'm more classically liberal because I'm open. I mean, just temperamentally, just speaking, like purely like that type of basis. I care too much about what people say to be a conservative, and I don't think that. And I think appealing to a constitution in a way is almost a fallacy, because I mean, it was written in there. There's a few. I mean, like, we don't have to go into all that. I mean, there was a law that said, you could own me. So it's like, are you saying that the Constitution and the laws, what's the written word, is the be all end all, or is it the transcendental spirit that stands above that? Because then it didn't say, it didn't say our government given rights that our government inalienable rights that should not be They said our God given rights. So I mean, and even though there's description that they weren't really. Well, whatever. And even that is just an argument. I mean, were they? I mean, who knows? And some people say that they were, I think, like deists or something. Some people say that they didn't really. I don't know. I'm not educated.
The point is that government isn't the source of your rights; they're natural rights.
Yeah, like, it's the government. They don't tell me what is truth or not. Like that, it's a transcendental thing that tells me what truth is.
Yeah,
the government's just they're the middle people.
There you go. There to adjudicate right order, something like that, or ordered liberty. Okay, so we've touched on pretty much everything. Last thing here. So you mentioned several things that I disagree and agree with throughout. One thing that I want to touch on is people who listen to this who are not from a background similar to yours or similar to mine. what they might hear is they might hear some things that they say like, oh, Michael said X or Kyle said X. I want people to consider things and appreciate the distinction between the universal and the general.
Yeah.
The universal is something like unmoving, um, as if law, essentially, as if a law of the universe. General is something that tends to hold. It's not even necessarily a prescription. It just says this is typically the case. And so I think people will do very well on all sides. Actually, I see this would be a good piece of advice. When someone says something you disagree with, appreciate that they might not be speaking universally, but speaking generally. The stuff with COVID and the post-mortem studies, that I am with you, man. Like those miscount or not miscountings, that methodology for counting seems totally bunk.
Yeah.
And there was a whole bunch of like political reasons maybe that was happening. I don't know how widespread it was either. I know that it was at least happening to a few hospitals that were funded by the federal government, but
Yeah.
regardless, shouldn't have happened probably, or should have done separate accounting. You know, you could always have multiple ways to calculate a number and do some sensitivity analyses based on which operationalization you go through. But last question. So we talked about some Daily Wire guys earlier. I think you and I overlap a little bit in terms of our temperament, and maybe even a little in our political philosophy, though I'm not sure. We'll find out as we continue on in this life. But we talked about Michael Knowles in that particular debate, but I want to talk about one of the founders, Ben Shapiro, who you mentioned as one of the first IDW guys you'd come across. He and Jordan Peterson, Gad Saad of that same stripe, all that kind of stuff. And there's lefties in there, Heather Heying, Ion Hersey Ali, Brett and Eric Weinstein. So with Ben, he has what's probably the most famous phrase associated with Ben. Facts don't care about your feelings, right?
Right.
And you mentioned your friend Nicole earlier, who had done a what you thought was like kind of like a poetic job of showing you, hey, are you just doing what you were doing before, but with the opposite ideological camp? I thought that was a really like elegant way for her to kind of manifest that in a way that wasn't, you know, it's disarming, but it's direct. So here's my question for you. You said a couple of things, and I'm not making a value judgment about these. I'm going to ask you about them. You've said things like you talk about the act of sex between a man and a woman, and I know what you're talking about with separating the telos versus that just that material act itself. But you talk about ideally, I think you said something like ideally between a man and a woman. You said something like early on, like ripping the penises off young boys, which I know what you're talking about there too. That's the surgical intervention of gender affirming care for people who can't actually get medical consent. I understand where you're going there. Here's my question. I could see someone like Ben Shapiro saying there's nothing wrong with that because that's a factual articulation of what's going on. And I also can logically build my case for why I'm saying that and whatever the surrounding conversations. My question to you is something that I hope is somewhat in the spirit of Nicole, which is facts don't care about your feelings, but does Kyle? And if Kyle does, how do you go about determining how you say things and in what context you do so?
That's a great question. And I think I have a reasonable answer for it.
Okay.
So an idea that was presented to me, I think it was about 2 years ago, was the concept of Philia Nikia versus Philia Sophia.
Okay.
And Philia Sophia is the word Philia is to love, Sophia is to Philia Sophia is Philia is the philosophy, Sophia is the love of. So it's that Latin phrase to love wisdom. Mm. And the Philia Nikia would be the goddess of victory, winning. Mm. That would be that mode, the love of winning. Mm. And something that I've been hyper conscious of is when I'm engaging in an act, or while I'm saying something, if I'm having a conversation with someone, is, you know, which mode am I being in? Is this Philia Sophia nature? Are we in the dialogos, or are we engaging in the pathos? Are we engaging in a antisocial, introverted, instrumental word battle, word war? So that's something I'm always hyper conscious of it. Which one am I pray, I hope I'm in the philosophy of nature, and I'll end it with this. And I also think this is perhaps the greatest quote of all time.
Yeah.
This is by Plato. And this quote changed my life. He said, why, you probably know. He said, wise man speaks when he has something to say. Fools speak when they have to say something.
Mm.
And that is like my gospel right there. Like, and I've tweeted that a lot. I've told that to other content creators like me. Like there's there's someone I follow who she has great content, but I'm like, you ever ask yourself, do you think that when you tweet or when you make these videos, do you think did you have something to say about this, or did you have to make a comment on that?
Mm.
And these are two different modes, and the reason why that quote stuck with me is because like there's something. Am I the master of my body? Am I just going to say this because I just had to make it? Am I reacting, or am I acting on my values?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm always consciously aware of, am I merely just reacting,
Mm-hmm.
or am I making a conscious decision on what I'm doing?
Mm-hmm.
And and everyone should be asking themselves that. Did I have to say that to her?
Mm-hmm.
Did I have to act that way?
Mm-hmm.
Or did I have something to say? Or do I have to do I have to do this?
Mm-hmm.
So I hope that answered the question.
It answered half of it. Just very quickly to clean up the other half. You answered the part about kind of discerning when you want to say something or when you want to behave in a certain way.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you try to have a very particular type rationale for engaging or for saying something. Now my next question is, this goes back to the facts, care about your feelings, but don't care about your feelings, but does Kyle?
I missed a part of that.
So that does Kyle care about your feelings? So let's say you have something to say.
Yeah.
Right? So you've determined, okay, we're in this philosophia frame. Being silent is not an option. You've determined that. Now there are those who would say, okay, say what you need to say it forthrightly, no problem. And there's those who would also say, okay, be careful how you say what you need to say.
Yeah.
Which of those camps do you fall in?
I think I would probably fall under both, a combination of both. I'm very trying to be cognizant of how I say something versus what is said. I had that Stoic quote. I need to see who said that. Don't listen to the words coming out of my mouth. Listen to what ties them together.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that quote encapsulates. I mean, that's pretty much my answer right there. We like to, and the facts have their roles,
mm-hmm.
and I think what lies underneath the facts is the values. I mean, that's really what the whole title of this thing is called. It's like, and I know Ben has facts don't care about your feelings, but then when we get into subjects of like metaphysics and like morality and stuff, and then that's when all the hyper atheists can come and say, well, okay, well, this fact says this, but now it looks like you're backtracking on your mantra.
Mm-hmm.
What now, Ben? We got you.
Mm-hmm.
And they're actually right. Like, facts don't care about your feelings.
Mm-hmm.
But he never said that. It's not a zero-sum game. He never said that one was more valuable than the other. He just said that facts exist in a domain that are outside of our feelings.
Mm-hmm.
And feelings exist in a domain that are outside of the facts. He never said that one was worth more, or we should pay attention to one more than the other. And something that, and this is also why I'm not conservative, because sometimes people will take that ethos of facts don't care about your feelings. Oh, I don't want to hear it. Well, that's the facts. It's like, well, if that's what we're going to go by,
mm-hmm.
then like, so where's your argument for morality then? Like, if we're just gonna hyper focus on knowledge, gnosis, knowing, if you're gonna place that at the highest, then what is your arguments against totalitarian regimes that place science at the top of their pyramid?
Sure.
That
At least.
that place knowing that no what you're what now?
Mm-hmm.
It's the same argument with adhering to the Constitution, right? Adhering to what another piece of paper, even adhering to the Bible. Like I mean, when people you'll see some people argue, literally use the Bible to make their points with every single thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh, in John 3:16, this said this. Okay, well, in the Book of Romans, it said that. It's like you have to be aware that you have to just be aware that you're doing that. You have to, I mean, if we can make like a poster, if we can just make like one like sentence or one thing to wrap up this whole entire conversation, just to be aware, just pay attention. That's what Orus's eye was. It was that I believe that's why that was at the top of the pyramid. Because if you deconstruct that symbol, there was a pyramid there, but Orus's eye. So the reason why that eye was plucked out is because he was a fallen. He represented this was written in Maps of Meaning. Well, he didn't write the story, but you know what I mean.
I got you.
Yeah. So what Orus he represented that fallen state, the king that's it's kind of washed up, and it needs to be something you're just not as powerful as you could be, and that eye, and when Osiris rescued that, and that eye is placed above the pyramid, it means that here is our structure. It could be economy, it could be our philosophy, it could be our rules, it could be our constitution, it could be our country, our rights. This is our structure. But the eye is above the pyramid. Why is it above? It's not part of it. It's above it. It's above it because the pyramid is guided. There's something outside of the system that the system is abiding by. So so the system is hierarchically organized, but it's organized in a way that is serving a value that's outside of the system itself. Systems that don't do that do away with, and the eye means to pay attention. All that eye means is beware. Are you being truthful? Did you really mean that? Could you handle that situation better? That's the eye represents. Just pay attention. Maybe you won't always have the answer. You're not always going to know if you did that thing right, but it just means just pay attention to how you're conducting yourself. That ethic is outside of the pyramid. In systems that do away with that eye, there's a thing on the dollar. I think it means that's not e pluribus unum. It's something else that is written. It's some Latin phrase. I think it means constantly doing. It means something. I'm gonna forget it, but it basically means it just means constant. It's a Latin phrase that translates to constant introspection. It's like it's investigating, always paying attention. We may have this thing now, but it could be better. What's going on? Is everything functioning properly? We don't want to be too far to the right where we're just conserving everything and we don't want any change, because that's how you get it. That's how you get the tyrant. And you don't want to be to the point where everything's just changing, because that's how the pyramid falls apart. So the eye represents just paying attention. Are you paying attention to the fact that kids are now killing themselves at a significantly higher rate than they were? You're paying attention to that, despite your system that tells you that this methodology is the quote unquote best methodology to use in this particular instance. Are you paying attention to the fact that people that were now on our cell phones more than we're actually speaking? Are you paying attention to are you paying attention to these things? Are you paying attention to, when you're at this pride parade, how many people you're lusting over beside of it? Even if you do go there with your significant other, are you paying attention to what's actually going on? Are you paying attention to the meta issue? Well, no, we're just at the parade. Well, no, I'm just doing my thing in and of itself. Well, no, this is just my thing. This is my thing, and there is no purpose. We're doing it for its own sake. Yeah. You're going to I mean, this is a common theme that we've been talking about this whole entire time. You know,
Mhm.
the things that are existing in and of themselves. Go ahead, you have your thing. You go ahead, do your thing. Don't pay attention to how it can consume your entire life.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the pride parade. We could use a heterosexual example in the just a guy and his friends going to Hooters and they're all married. What do you think that's just you going for a meal? Are you sure? Are you certain about that? So
Yeah.
I'm with you, man. Okay. Well, this was excellent, Kyle. I do want to plug one book, maybe, and I'm going to ask you to plug everything that you want to plug. I want to, if you have not already, because you're a vociferous reader, as far as I can tell, Nas Nicholas Taleb. He's the guy who popularized the Black Swan. He's a former Wall Street quant and empirical philosopher, I would say. He
Yeah.
has a book series called The Incerto, and the first book in that series is
Called
called
what?
Incerto. I-N-C,
Shirt.
yeah, Incerto, Incerto. Um, but he's
Italian word.
yeah.
What does that mean?
I have no idea. I don't know what the Incerto means. But it's a 5 book series. And the first book is called Fooled by Randomness. And I think that it's a bit different in flavor to a lot of what you draw on, but it also has embedded in it a lot of the same critiques of like this hyper rationalistic um we know more than we think we know, or we think we know more than we know, rather, type of worldview. And he comes from Wall Street quants, and he's a very big statistician type guy, but he also has this empirical philosophy. I think that book would be interesting,
Cool.
if nothing else, because I think you guys would share some of the same critiques. And he also has the same notion that I think you've advocated a couple times here, which is there can be embedded wisdom inherited through the ages or through experience that doesn't have to be rationally explained in some sort of material scientific process in order for it to be true, or at least for it to
Yeah.
be effective.
Not only does it not have to be, it can.
That's interesting.
Sorry, I think I just unlocked like another hour of
Yeah, I know.
conversation.
All
I
right,
didn't mean to say
we'll
that.
do this again for sure. We'll pick up with that. But before we go, I want to offer anything you want to plug before we adjourn.
I don't have any like New York bestsellers uh to encourage anyone to go read. But we'll take a I feel as if we were slightly being a dead horse. I encourage anyone who to read. It's hard. It's a hard book. Carl Jung's Psychological Types. This was a book that he published in the 20th century. I believe it was like somewhere in the 1930s. I think 1938. Could be wrong about that.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the translation was translation. It was 19 something, and then it was translated in 1921, and that's when it was translated in English. That's when it started spreading or whatever. In this book, Psychological Types, Carl Jung was a person. I don't know if anyone listening to this or not, but he was the one who derived the words introverted and extroverted. He was the one who created that kind of model of viewing different people. And I've been talking about introverts and extroverts for like a year now. I'm starting to like, I want to specialize in that. I'm thinking like, I'm really, really interested in that. We didn't talk about it at all. That's a good thing because I probably would have talked about it for the entire time. But I believe that this is, if I haven't said enough like radical things on this podcast yet, here's one here. I'm just going to add the cherry on top. I think that a lot of people got that wrong, what introverts and extroverts were. I'm not saying that I have the right interpretation. Okay. I'm just saying that a lot, I think, from what I've seen, but people from the colloquial sense, how people just averagely use those two words is not right. I think people should read Psychological Types, but even if it's a hard book, I'm just going to be straight up. It's not hard, but it just requires your attention, like anything else. I mean, if you just sit there and freaking, I was watching one of my friends a couple years ago play Fortnite, and I don't play video games. There's nothing wrong with video games at all, but there was like all these screens and all these like freaking like gems and like numbers. I'm like, yo, how are you like focusing on all this stuff? So people can do that. They can sit down for a couple minutes and just read Black black words on a white page. They can do that. If you can focus on all this stuff on the screen and use a thing, and like that requires so much more like resources, like cognitively, than just reading a book. It's like it's so cool. But anyway, introverts and extroverts are very interesting. And number one, so I'm just gonna end with this. We're gonna be kind of fast with this.
Sure.
So I could be wrong. I'm always trying to say that I could be wrong, but from what I've read, Carl Jung never made a social point about introverts and extroverts. The level of analysis on introverts and extroverts is the cognitive analysis, versus meaning how they acquire information, how they disseminate information, not their personality. People, they've conflated the big five with introversion and extroversion, and that's wrong. Introversion and extroversion is deeper. And that's about it's about, I kept using the word introverted throughout the conversation. It probably threw you off when I was saying introverted romanticism. That is what introversion is. Introverts bind themselves to objects and have a romantic attachment to them. Introverts they perceive the world by thinking. So thinking is related to fantasy, related to aspiring. Thinking, aspiring. Well, what is this? What could it be? How can I use this thing? What is it? Exactly. Like your hand on the chin. Exactly what you're doing right now. What is this thing? That is an introverted cognition, and that is why introverts are shy, because they require a romantic attachment to an object, a person, idea before they have that more everyday situation. Extrovert is complete opposite. They abstract from the object, so they just need something to talk to. So people think that they're not just talking your head off because they're interested in what you have to say. The introvert is not interested about you. They just need something. They abstract from the object. They say, "Oh, how can I get this another way?" How can they're guided by pattern recognition. They don't care if they're not romantic about the objects. So that's the difference. So I'm just gonna, that's a little teaser there. But he never made social points about being and that's why they like to talk. Because after I talk your head off, and you nod your head a few times, and you show like you're not interested in talking to me anymore, I'm going to say, "Okay, Michael, see you," and then I'm going to go talk some other head off.
Interesting.
That drives that social interaction. But psychological types, highly recommend you read it, and it's hard. But
psychological types, Carl Jung, no problem. I've got a list of. We'll discuss when we after we adjourn. I'll send you an email. I've got a list of Incerto. Yeah, that's the book series, but the specific book is called Fooled by Randomness.
Fooled by Randomness. Cool. All right.
But all right, Kyle. Everyone, make sure you check out Well-Rounded Fool, the lecture series on YouTube. And until next time. Stay honest, stay rigorous, and keep speaking freely. From Is Taught is a FreedomCast network production. To find out more about the network, check out freedomcast.us or freedomcast.locals.com. Thank you.